Hello everyone, I'm Paula Cunningham, State Director for AARP. Thank you so much for joining us for this inaugural segment of Real Possibilities with AARP. For this next 30-minute segment, we're going to be talking about something very near and dear to our hearts, that's caregiving. Joining us today, we have some very distinguished guests. To my right, we have Melissa Seifert, who is the Associate State Director for Advocacy for AARP, Michigan. Hello, Melissa. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
And Dr. Mary Clark, who is or was a caregiver for many, many years, but she's also the Assistant Dean of Student Affairs at Wayne State University. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Thank you for being here, for driving in this morning.
My pleasure.
I know it was a challenge, but thank you. Appreciate it. And also to my left here, we have Sean Bennis, who is the Family Caregiver Coordinator for our partners in the CARE Act, Henry Ford Health Systems. How are you?
Great, thank
Good.
you.
Thank you so much. Glad to have you here today. This has come a long way, haven't we?
Glad to be here.
We've come a long way from the beginning, which you'll be hearing about in just a moment. And also Richard Klein, who is the Deputy Director of the Michigan Office of Services to the Aging. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Thank you for being here as well.
My pleasure.
So let's get started. Most of you may or may not even know what a caregiver is. So who wants to, before we even get into the nuts and bolts of what we're going to talk about, who wants to define what is a caregiver? Melissa, do you want to take that?
Yeah, you know, I think there's two definitions out there right now. There's statistics and there's the reality. So statistics are anybody it's typically a woman who's 49 years old, who works outside of the home, but also dedicates about 20 hours a week to caring for their loved one. Now, when we take that into reality, what does that mean? My mom was a caregiver for years, but never self-identified as that caregiver, but she was taking my grandmother to appointments, doing her medication, you know, doing wound management. You know, I think Dr. Mary Clark can definitely speak to exactly what that means when you put it into practice.
Absolutely. And in Michigan, there are almost 2 million caregivers, people who are providing that care to billions and billions of dollars of savings for our economy. And so we are the unsung heroes, or caregivers are the unsung heroes. And most recently, I know Henry Ford was involved and Dr. Clark certainly gave testimony, but with a lot of partners, AARP was very successful in getting the CARE Act passed. Talk about the CARE Act. Who wants to talk about the CARE Act and what it does? You want to take that? Then we'll have
Sure. You know, since, you know, I was kind of the front line and taking most of the brunt, if you will, on this legislation. So the CARE Act has 3 provisions. This is a nationwide initiative that began with AARP, and each state is really implementing this slowly but surely across the country. We're the 25th state that did it. There's 3 provisions to the CARE Act, and first and foremost, it allows a patient who is put into the hospital, forgive me, to designate a family caregiver. The second provision is at the time of discharge, that caregiver will then pick up their loved one and be educated on what aftercare is needed. The third provision is actual training and education on what type of aftercare is going to be needed, whether that's a live instruction, whether that's, you know, the discharge nurse is explaining what kind of wound care needs to happen. So we're very excited about this legislation and now this law come July 12th, changing the culture of what hospitals typically think of between a caregiver and a patient and that hospital.
And thank you, Melissa, and it does have an impact. I mean, $15 billion savings to the economy for people providing care, so that means that someone else isn't being paid to do that. This is unpaid care.
This is unpaid care, yeah.
And yet it's a personal story, right, Mary? It's a very personal story as well. So tell us a little bit about what this act and why the CARE Act is even important in terms of your journey of caregiving.
Well, first of all, it's an honor just to be here with this panel because all during my time when I was caring for my mother, I did it out of love. I didn't think that I would be representing the voice of, you know, millions of people. But what the CARE Act has meant for me is that other families won't have to experience what our family did. I took my mother to the hospital on August 2nd, and she needed blood transfusions. On August 5th, I picked her up after her transfusions, and she was sitting in a wheelchair in her room, dressed, waiting for me. She had a brown envelope on her lap. And I asked, was there anything I needed to know? And they said, no, she's ready to go. And so we took her home, and in retrospect, perhaps I should have asked more questions, but our family was very vigilant with my mother's medication. This was the third time that she was in the hospital during her decline of health, which started in January of 2011. And so on this trip to the hospital, I thought, you know, I knew the drill. Stop by the pharmacy, we'll pick up whatever prescriptions are needed, go home, incorporate those into all the other, you know, at least 15 other prescriptions and the timing of those prescriptions and everything. So no instruction about the prescriptions, but my sister and I, who managed her medicine, we were well versed on all the medications that she was taking. And when my mother had to return to the hospital in December, this was her final time into the hospital. She had the flu. And after they diagnosed the flu, and again, she needed blood transfusions, they did some other additional tests because she had been lethargic, sleeping for hours, not really wanting to wake up. They told us that she had extreme damage to her kidneys. Actually, they were functioning at 10%. And they said there was a medication that she had been taking that was supposed to be short-term. And not only was she taking this medication, but it was double the dose that she should have been taking. And they said, Mary, you have two options, because I was the power of attorney for health care for her. They said, we can give her dialysis, which would probably be very difficult at her frail state of being, or you can take her home for hospice care. And so a couple days after Christmas, I took my mother home for hospice care, and on January 9th, my mother passed away.
Wow. Well, sorry to hear that. She was very, very fortunate to have you as a daughter and as a caregiver, and I know that in hindsight, you probably look at that and think, you know, could I, should I, would have done something different, but you were there. You were there, and so many people don't have someone who's there. Sean, you just heard Mary's story. Tell us a little bit about Henry Ford and some of the procedures that they put in place when someone's discharged from the hospital. I know Henry Ford was an early adopter and supporter of the CARE Act, and you were really ahead of a lot of other healthcare facilities in terms of the work that you do there. Tell us a little bit about what you do at Henry Ford and their procedures and processes.
Well, I just want to say thank you to Mary for sharing your story. I think that we need to hear more stories from patients and caregivers so we can really understand what kind of impact not including the caregiver in the discharge process there is. Many people are surprised that the hospital hasn't already been doing this for many, many years. I was surprised that we haven't been as diligent as we could have. So I'm very personally happy that the CARE Act has come about, as well as part of my role as the coordinator of the Family Caregiver Initiative for Henry Ford Health System. So this is a dedicated role to bring forth the Family Caregiver Initiative to the whole Henry Ford Health System, including the newest member of Henry Ford Health System, which is Allegiance Health. So it's great that we're here and able to talk about this. And so with Henry Ford being the early adopters, we have been able to make changes in our electronic medical record to reflect including the caregiver. So like Melissa said, that the patients need to be given the opportunity to identify a caregiver when they come to the hospital. And so when they do that, then the nurse or social worker or whoever is admitting them inputs that information into the electronic medical record for everybody to see. Who is that caregiver? Who do we need to make sure that we communicate with and include them in the discharge plan? No one should be waiting in a wheelchair with a brown envelope on their lap and ready to go when their caregiver comes to pick them up. That just is not the way we want to be portrayed at all. We want to make sure we include that caregiver in. And many times the caregiver can't come in person. So that caregiver then needs to be communicated in a different means, whether during physician rounds, that caregiver then is called on the phone and included in rounds, because as we know, caregivers need to work.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
They have to help support that family, and it is so difficult. So being able to just think outside the box and do things a little bit differently. And we're trying to communicate that across the health system so that we can do that and meet the needs of our patients and caregivers.
Do you hear stories like Mary's frequently?
Oh, too frequently. It's heartbreaking. We actually have a patient advisor group, and it's patients and caregivers. So it's really engaging the patients and the caregivers in on the new processes that are going across the health system. And what's remarkable is these patients and caregivers are volunteers that come to the health system and say, I want to help give back. I want to give you my opinion on the different initiatives going on in the health system. And so we meet monthly for about an hour and a half, and we find out, we have 16 patient and caregiver volunteers that come in monthly that are dedicated. So once in a while, it's, there's 15, but most of the time it is the 16 people that come, and they give us their opinion on how to create our website. So we created a family caregiver website on henryford.com for all of those resources that we can house together so that caregivers can go there and find the resources that they need to help them in caring for their loved one. So they were able to give us their opinion on what makes sense. Does the language make sense? Are we speaking what patients and caregivers can understand? And is the layout okay? Are all of the resources there that you're looking for that you would like to see?
What a concept, listening to the patient, listening to the customer, listening to the people who are going to provide the care. I mean, it sounds so simple, but yet a lot of places weren't doing it. That's why we needed the CARE Act. You also mentioned something else about a designated position. So you are designated just for that purpose. That's phenomenal. That's awesome.
That's all I do.
That's all you do.
That's all I do is think about the caregiver and how we can reach out to the caregiver.
Which is so smart to have that, because this is a growing trend amongst our generation to have somebody be a family caregiver. And I think now that AARP and other groups have brought this to light, that this is what this is your title, it's just smart to include that. So thank you for all of your work with Henry Ford.
I'm grateful. I'm just grateful to the health system.
And Mary's one face of a caregiver, and she's very well educated, PhD, assistant dean. There are many faces of caregivers out there, Richard, and I know your office does everything they can in terms of trying to help the offices of the aging, helping those services, provide services. Talk a little bit about some of the work that you're doing in this arena.
So Paula, thank you for having me today. It's an honor to be here and partnering with AARP, and just appreciate this opportunity to talk about the Aging and Adult Services Agency of the state of Michigan. We're now part of the Department of Health and Human Services, and we do our work through a decentralized network of the area agencies on aging. We cover the entire state, and we enable people to as caregivers do, stay in their homes and get the services they need there. Everything from Meals on Wheels to in-home help. But where things dovetail very naturally with the CARE Act and AARP, it's providing support to those caregivers. So we do a lot of training. We've provided, through state and federal funds, provided over 700,000 hours in training hours to caregivers, and particularly dementia training, elder abuse. So we're really getting out there in our front lines, the AAAs, area agencies on aging, the commissions on aging, and then just a really vast network of caregivers that are out there.
When someone needs more information, if there's someone who hears this program and they say, where do I go to get additional help or assistance? People don't know what they don't know. How can you find out more about what resources are available for caregivers? Where would our audience go to find out more about that?
Well, for our services, they can come right to our website at the Area Agency on Aging through the State of Michigan website. It might still be under the Offices of the Services of the Aging, which was our former title.
Thank you. And Melissa, I know AARP has a lot of resources or reference material resources they can go to as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, so a couple things when we were talking about sharing stories. When AARP first started this work with caregivers, we had a platform where we had individuals across the country, but Michigan specifically added stories into iHeart Caregivers. So that's one of the great platforms where you can see other stories, connect with other caregivers, share, best practices, if you will, and stories like, Dr. Mary Clark's, which you see a little bit too much of. Secondly, our .org website is always a great resource, AARP.org. Sometimes a little challenging to navigate because we have so much information on there, but they do have a tab for caregivers specifically, so I'd highly recommend people visiting that. And lastly, I think one of the things that AARP has really done a great job of as of lately is we got a law passed, now what? And so with that in mind, we're going across the state and giving presentations and educating individuals on what the CARE Act will do for you. So we have a number of events coming up in the Detroit area. We have one in Lansing coming up. But if you want to find out more information about those in particular and you want to attend them, they're all free, open to AARP members and non-members. No age limit, so feel free to come out, bring your mom, bring your dad, bring your loved one. But you can find those at aarp.org/mi.
And so many people think that, well, I'm not involved with caregiving now, but it's been said that everybody's involved. And there are 4 types of people in the world: those who need care, those who will need care, those who give care, or those who will give care. So it's always nice to know where to go ahead of time to be preventive, if at all possible. So if you'd had these kinds of resources and material information ahead of time, it would have made so much difference in terms of that brown envelope being on your mother's lap. But you may not have been here today, so we do thank you for thank you for being here today. And I know the governor's office was very supportive of the CARE Act earlier on. What's the impact for the state of Michigan?
Well, the governor's administration supported the CARE Act because they understand Michigan's growing senior population, and with that growing senior population, the needs that go along with it. So not only will this support the patients, but the CARE Act is going to support those caregivers through information and education, and that's why the governor's office was so supportive of this act.
Mel, what else is AARP doing? I know you talked about the Caregiving Series, and I know there's some things going on there, not just in terms of the caregiver, but in terms of releasing from the hospital or being discharged, but also finances and some other topics as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at the caregiver holistically. What are their needs? What do they need from AARP? And now that we have this law passed, I'm looking, for next fiscal year and what we can do for the budget come 2018. So I know one of the things that we are going to push for this upcoming budget cycle is more dollars towards respite care. So when you hear about respite care, what does that mean? Everybody has a different definition, but our definition of it is taking your loved one to some facility or having some kind of home aid help come in to give you assistance. So those home and community-based services that allow that caregiver a little reprieve, a little respite from caring from their loved one, and they can go in and have somebody take care of them for a couple hours a week or a day, whatever that may be. So we're really going to push the governor's office for that. We're really going to push the legislature for that and really show, again, that economic value that allowed us to get the CARE Act passed this past year.
Fantastic. And, yeah, absolutely. And again, this 8 out of 10 Michiganders will be involved in some type of caregiving. So this is what we mean when we talk about real possibilities, all right, that there are opportunities, there are resources, there's information out there, and whatever we can do to make certain that people have that ahead of time. I applaud all of the different agencies here for doing that. Richard, did you want to add anything else?
No, I just wanted to say in addition to that, there's a lot of need out there yet. So as much as we're doing, there's still so much more to be done.
Tell us a little bit about one of the stories that you've heard that actually touched your heart in some way in terms of caregivers or people not having information. I still don't know that people always understand what a caregiver really is. And I heard someone say that they go by their parents' house once a week to mow the lawn. Then they go by once a week to write their checks or to provide some financial assistance. Or then they might go by just to kind of check on them. And they don't consider themselves a caregiver, but they are. They actually are. And so you've heard stories with 16 different caregivers out there and push the button. Tell us a caregiving story that comes to your mind.
So not only the caregivers that take care of our patients every day that are unpaid, but we also have our employees of Henry Ford Health System that are also caregivers. So they come to work, they work 40 hours a week, they go home, and then they're also a caregiver. And so we've recognized that we have to also support our employees that are also caregivers. So we've created an employee resource group, an ERG, specifically for caregivers called I Care for You.
Oh, very
Unique,
nice.
huh?
Yeah.
And so we've heard from our employees all of their caregiver stories, and we're actually going to be adding some of those stories to our website because I find that so many of them are so compelling. But one of them that comes to mind is, and we have today been talking about caring for the older adult, but at Henry Ford we're trying to focus on from, child all the way on up, right? And so we need to have resources for children as well as that middle-aged of 19 to 64 as well as that 65 and older. So there was this one employee that told her story that she couldn't work full-time because she has triplets. And one of them is severely disabled, severely disabled, and requires a lot of physical therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy 3 times a week in her home because it's such a taxing effort to get that child out of the home. They can't take family vacations, so on and so forth. You can just imagine. And she doesn't qualify for Family Medical Leave Act because she doesn't work full time. So what do we do with that employee? How do we support that employee? And so that one really just tugged at me, tugged at my heartstrings. So I failed to mention that we had focus groups for employees. So we had focus groups early last fall to find out what do our employees need, what are the challenges of caregivers amongst our employees of Henry Ford, and that was one of the stories that was told, and amazing. And so we actually had our human resources department in the room to hear those stories, and so they are making active changes in different policies and things to help support our employees.
And I heard also about some of the working caregivers. I heard you talk about that. I've heard you talk about that. You were working when you were taking care of your mother. I know there's some pending legislation that we're looking at that will actually help give a tax credit because, they're saving, $15–16 billion in the caregiver saves when they take care of their loved one in their own home. So there's some legislation about a little bit of a tax credit that will help offset like the door, if you had to change doorknobs, if you have to change. Go ahead, talk about that.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I didn't know you were going with that at first, but I'm totally on now. So, yes, there is going to be a home credit for individuals that want to do small adjustments. One of our colleagues, Karen Caffin-Terrace, leads the charge in a program called Home Fit. And we know, and I'm going to throw out a statistic, and I'm pretty sure this is accurate, about when we did a poll of 50-plussers of likely voters a couple years ago, we found that 85% of people want to stay in their homes as long as possible. Why wouldn't you, right? And so with that in mind, we're going across the country and doing these Home Fit programs that are small adjustments, like, putting handles by the toilet, adjusting your door so it's larger to get a walker or a wheelchair through it. And so the legislature does have legislation that has gone through the Senate. It's now in the House that would, I forgot the exact dollar amount, but would give you a tax credit on doing these small adjustments to your home, because we do know that staying in your home is more cost effective for the state of Michigan than going into a costly nursing home facility. So again, always that economic driver behind these legislative factors, but that's kind of what's getting things done right now, and that's the messaging.
I've heard so many stories. We did a caregiving series about a year ago, 200 or 300 people in the room just telling their stories, or they're online, their stories. There's a lot of guilt associated with, you're tired, you don't want to let people know that you're tired. It's what you do. You don't label yourself or wear a badge saying, hello, my name is Paula Cunningham, I'm a caregiver. You just do what you do. And you do it for so long that it does become automated, but it takes its toll on the caregiver as well. Mentally, emotionally, and that's part of that kind of respite care, why we need the respite care. You need a break every now and then. You need to step away without feeling the guilt. Can you identify with that?
Oh, yes. And I was fortunate to be on a caregiving team. We had 12 people that cared for my mother 24/7, and I was kind of the coordinator of the schedule as well as being one of the 12 dream team, I call them. And when I wasn't there, I felt like I needed to be doing more because I was 90 miles away. And every time the phone rang, I just wanted to know what was the problem, and I had to have a solution. And so I felt guilty because I wasn't there. I felt guilty when I was there that I wasn't doing enough. I felt guilty that we had to ask other people to help. There's just guilt. But the good thing is that we had the ability to have 12 people helping. These 12 people, 9 other people, in addition to my 2 sisters, who are now family members. They're an extended family.
Absolutely. And Sean, you're going to get all these other hospitals on board too and make certain that they do what you're doing over at Henry Ford? Are you going to go out there and charge on the forward or the other?
I welcome if any of the other health systems are watching and they want to partner. I'm more than willing to have those collaborative conversations with them, because I could be in the area of another health system and need the help and have my caregiver included. So I surely don't want to exclude anybody from that. But I do want to say that if you are a caregiver and you find that your loved one is in the hospital, speak up. Do not be afraid. Make sure that your presence is known, and let the hospital know that you're willing to be a partner with them, that you're not the enemy, that you are here to help them do their job. And you'll find that they will welcome you with open arms. But the patient, your loved one, needs to identify you as their caregiver. So making sure that you are identified in that electronic medical record as their caregiver, and then it'll be a lot easier.
And that's what the CARE Act does. It makes certain that when you're admitted, that hospital, that patient has the right to say who their caregiver is. And it doesn't have to be a family member.
No, it does not. It can be a friend, relative, it can be your neighbor, it can be really anybody that patient identifies. But sometimes patients will come into the hospital and say, no, I don't have anybody, don't bother them, and that'll be that, right? But so if you come in later as the caregiver, they can update that medical record. It's not just a one and done kind of deal.
It's good for them to know. Very good. Mel, what would you like for people to know?
You know, my big takeaway is really use the resources that we all chatted about today. Go michigan.gov and look up the agency's website. Use Henry Ford's website. Go to AARP.org and use our websites. And I know it's challenging when you're a caregiver, because my mom, when she was in it, she was in it. You know, my grandmother just passed away in February, and she has a little PTSD. And I don't use that lightly. I think that's a real accurate assessment of what's going on with her right now. And she still picks up the phone, and you know, so I think it's hard to get to events. And when AARP is having these live events, I know it's challenging, but I think it's important for you as the caregiver to take that time and not feel the guilt and become more educated about what the CARE Act is going to do for you come July 12th. You know, share with other individuals, laugh about the experiences that you go through. My mom had a lot of humor about caring for my grandmother, and it got her through. You know, I think laughter is a really great medicine at times. So I hope that you'll take advantage of these live events. We're hoping to live stream them as well, a few of them. So if you're not able to do so, hopefully you're watching this right now, you can live stream our other events, but really take that time to take care of yourself.
I mean, and AARP is involved in so many things involving caregivers, whether it's telehealth, whether it's veterans, whether it's finances, and people aren't working, aren't saving, they're working, but they're not saving. You know, the economy sometimes doesn't allow everyone to be able to save. All that impacts a caregiver. You know, at the end of the day, you've got to have finances, whether it's the extra $3,000 or $4,000 that they may get if this legislation passes, or whether it's just, you know, the trips back and forth, there's additional finances. And so how do we save for that? How do we prepare for that ahead of time so it's not such a burden when that time comes? Because it will come. It will come for everybody. And so we need to be mindful of that. And that's what AARP does. We pay attention to everyone who's 50 and older. That's what Henry Ford's doing. That's what the state of Michigan offices are doing. And that's what your voice is lending more information to. I'd like to, again, thank the entire panel for being here with us today for our inaugural session of Real Possibilities with AARP. And it's not just thank you for being here. It's not just thanking you for coming to work every day, but the way that you lead with such passion and such commitment, the way that you lead from your heart is contagious for all of us. It will actually have an impact on every single person that you touch, every life that you come in contact with. And for that, we also thank you. And for all of you who are listening, if you need additional information, please go to aarp.org. /caregiving and get additional information. And also don't hesitate to come to some of the caregiving sessions that are all throughout the state. We look forward to continuing to serve you. We appreciate you and all that you do. This is Real Possibilities with AARP. Thank you for watching.